I'd like to call the school committee to order, please.
Madam Chair, if I may. I understand we're here to move for executive session. I'll make a motion. The motion will be for executive session to discuss 3 open meeting law complaints. One is a complaint about a September 4th, 2018 Medfield School Committee meeting in which the complainant alleges that there was not enough detail under the agenda for the subjects of staffing update and superintendent's report to the committee. The complainant requests immediate and future compliance with the open meeting law. A second is a complaint of the same complainant that the school committee deliberated about the resignation of a longtime school committee member and the interim appointment process and protocol to replace him. Obviously, that issue is before us at a later meeting with the Board of Selectmen tonight. That complaint also requests a $1,000 fine. And the third complaint is about a June 4th, it references a June 4th school committee meeting. The sum and substance of the complaint is that the Social Emotional Learning Task Force, I gather because it has made recommendations that have included policies, it should be deemed to be a subcommittee of the school committee. All 3 complaints are brought by Christine McHugh-Potts. They're all dated September 30th. And so we, under law, are required to meet within 14 business days and discuss, and we will move to executive session. So I'll move that Medfield School Committee will enter into executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21, subsection A1, to discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health, rather than the professional competence of an individual, or to discuss the discipline or dismissal of, or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual. Obviously, it's that last section that matters more specifically, the September 30, 2018 open meeting law complaints I've just summarized.
Okay, do I have a second? Second. Okay, I'm going to take a roll call. Chris Morrison?
Yes.
Leo Brown?
Yes.
Jessica Riley?
Yes.
And that's it?
I would note for the record that we'll come out for the sole purpose of adjournment and then moving into the joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. Yeah, Madam Chair, I erred in the motion. We're coming back out because we did have public comment still on the agenda, so.
Okay.
Open for comment.
Public comment? Okay, I motion.
Now I move adjournment.
Second?
All approved.
All right, great. So now we have to move.
Welcome, everybody, to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, October 16, 2018. For our viewers at home, I'm sorry we're starting a few minutes late. We're just getting organized coming out of executive session. I want to note at the conclusion of this meeting, we will be going into executive session to discuss pending litigation regarding LCB, both the DEP and land court cases. The open session will not be resuming after the conclusion of the executive session. This meeting, as always, is being video recorded, so conduct yourselves as though this will be preserved for posterity. And we'd like to begin, as we always do, by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving in the Middle East and around the world. All right, thank you. So we're starting with a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and the School Committee to fill a school committee vacancy by special election pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 11. For regular viewers of this program and Bill Massaro, who have gone through this before, the procedure we follow is we open it up for nominations for candidates for the special election. We'll then close the nominations, and then we proceed to a roll call vote. If any member of either board or committee has questions or anything to say, or any of the candidates want to say anything, they can obviously have an opportunity to do that as well. The eligible voters for the special election are the 4 remaining members of the school committee after Tim Von Fotti's resignation and the 3 members of the Board of Selectmen. All right, so I will open it up for nominations to fill the vacancy by special election.
I would like to nominate Megan Glenn.
Okay,
And I would second that.
other nominations? Okay, hearing none, nominations. Oh, sorry.
I nominate Dr. Meredith Chamberlain.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Any others? Okay, hearing none, nominations are closed. Does any member of a board or committee have any questions for either of the candidates? I assume Ms. Glenn and Dr. Chamberlain are here. Welcome. Would either of you like to say anything before we go? I know we have a letter from Ms. Glenn that was sent to us. Dr. Chamberlain, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say that.
Well, just, you need a microphone,
Yeah.
or you can go to the podium.
My name's Meredith Chamberlain. I've been a resident of Medfield for 7.5 years. I've spent my career in education. I did my undergrad in psych. I have my master's in education and counseling. I'm director of guidance for the Canton Public Schools. I have my doctorate in educational leadership from Boston University. My work is kids, and I've been able to do it professionally, but I would like to do it from the town that I'm raising my kids in. So that is why I'm interested.
Thank you. Ms. Glenn, anything?
You can pass the mic. Yeah. Yeah, do you want me to read the letter?
You can say it, whatever you want to say. The floor is yours, or you can,
I'll just give you the highlights. Megan Glenn. I've been a resident for 6.5 years here. I have 3 kids in the school system, 8th grade, 6th grade, and 3rd grade. My interest in the school board is it's been sort of a goal. I feel like I've been a volunteer in many aspects in the town, kind of leading up to this. I also have a background in education and have a master's degree in education. I was a former social studies high school teacher in Illinois, but when I moved here, I stopped teaching, and now solely I'm raising my kids. In doing so and not being in a teaching position, I've been able to do a lot of work within the schools. And looking around here, I feel like, with an exception of a few of you, have worked definitely with many of you are already on projects that I've listed in my letter of interest to all of you, and look forward to possibly having an opportunity to serve on the school committee.
all right, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board members?
I guess I'd ask Meredith, if you could, Chamberlain, if you could just elaborate a little more, because I'm just hearing about your background for the first time right at the moment. And so is there anything else you can tell me about
So I as well have
your
two.
background and why
Yep,
you're interested
yep.
and why
So
you're
I
coming
have
forward?
I have 2 students in the system. I have a son in 5th grade and a son in 1st grade. I served on site council at Memorial School for 4 years. I've been very involved and have coached at Medfield Youth Basketball for 5 years. I'm now a grade coordinator and a coach for a travel team of that. I grew up in a big city, so I grew up in Chicago, and I always wanted to raise my kids in a small town. And I think there's a lot of wonderful parts with the school system and a lot of great things, but I think we still need to make strides, especially in the area of student services. And I think there are some broken relationships between families in the school system, and I think we need to do some work in repairing those relationships. So I am interested in trying to get us to a very collaborative point where all of us together are working for the young ones of our community. So that is why I'm interested. I had been on the fence for a while, and I'm sorry I didn't submit the letter. Unfortunately, my son had croup Thursday night, and so Friday night I saw the date pass, and then I thought I was too late, and then I saw this, and I thought, well, maybe it isn't over. So here I am.
So I think I just heard you say broken relationships, did you? And can you maybe elaborate on that?
I just think, so with my background is obviously in counseling, and I think that, and I was in law school before I got into education, but I think there
Good
is
decision.
Go with the other way.
And I think we're all going to disagree. I mean, that's natural in life. But I think there's a common thing when you're talking about kids, that there's a softness and keeping the children in mind at all times. And I just think sometimes we get caught in the disagreement and not about sort of what kids really need. And I think that sometimes our teachers are asked to do too much. and wear a lot of hats. And I have questions. I mean, when the budget came out last year, I actually went line item by line item, and I talked with Mary Ann Sullivan when she was on the committee. So I have questions that I haven't had answered, and I really believe I'm here. I'm living here for the schools, and I am dedicated to education. I'm dedicated to our kids. So I'm doing so much on that end, but I look at all the kids that I know, and now I've coached a lot of them, and I know all of these kids, and I'm like, I could do more here. And so that's why I want to be involved.
And there was something that you said about services, student services. Can you just elaborate on what that was
So
about?
a few years ago, I'm sorry, Dr. Marsden, I don't know the exact year, when he had the outside consulting company come in and do an audit of student services. I was at those.
Was that part of the strategic planning process?
Yeah, and I was at those meetings where they asked parents of students that are in student services that either are on an IEP or 504, and I would classify as one of those parents. And the meeting was hours and a lot of emotion, and there were people that had students that had already come out of the system and graduated, and that there was this man that came there, and he came back even though his kids were gone and he had no more, just because he wanted to see things change for the better, and he wanted to be there in solidarity with us. And I just think a lot of us, we're stuck in a position because if we come public, or if we can't really talk about it because then we're identifying that our kids have needs. So we're in a different kind of a thing, because if you really talk about that kind of stuff, you're like, okay, well, now everybody can figure out one of my kids is. So even me getting on camera tonight and saying that I have a child that falls under that, like, I'm breaking the confidentiality of one of my kids. And I'm doing that because I really think that we really need to work harder on that, and we need to work harder on how we talk to people about those kinds of situations, because I think that it's fragmented, and I think a lot of it is more relationship building than just the actual decision in the end on whatever it may be. So I just want to give a voice to that, because we've had not a steady person in the student services position until this year, and she's only been here a couple months, so I can't speak to her longevity in the future, but it's been a revolving door, quite frankly, and there's a reason for that. So that's kind of why I'm interested.
Thank you. So maybe I'd ask Ms. Glenn if you had any comments that you wanted to make, and after hearing that, to elaborate on your letter, or is there anything else?
Anything specifically that you?
No, I just,
Grab the microphone.
just thought that, just wanted to give you the floor to have another opportunity, basically.
I mean, I do know what, I think I get the gist of what you're referring to, and I don't have a child currently on an IEP, but I do have one, and I'm gonna break the confidentiality again, who has anxiety and has had to have some modifications. And in dealing with people outside of the district, I have heard, oh, Medfield, that is notoriously a district where when a child has special needs, there needs to be fixes done. And so I know what you're saying, and I also agree. That being said, I don't think me taking a role on the school committee was necessarily, that's not an agenda of mine. I think that just being part of the committee and getting to kind of navigate the strategic plan that's been put into place and kind of get, like she said, it's just a better opportunity in which you can make a change. I feel like I've done the school parent thing, I've done the site council thing, I've done the PTO thing, I've ran fundraisers, I've done things that a parent can do, but I wanted to do more. And with my background in education, I'm not sure, I want to jump back in a teaching role, but while my kids are still in the system, and while, again, also, I'm from Chicago, and I moved here for my husband's job, but we could have picked anywhere that we wanted to move, and we picked Medfield, and it was primarily for the schools. And so in order to, make the most change, I feel like getting on the school committee would allow me to use my talents and my, life experience to help better the education of all the kids in Medfield.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
No more questions.
I've got a couple, one for each of you. You're filling an interim position on an incomplete term, and I'm curious about what your longer-term interest is. Are you This is kind of an abbreviated process, which is normally a very competitive elective process. You're filling in an incomplete term. Are you here just to fill that incomplete term, or is this actually something that will make you an incumbent with the idea that you would run for re-election when your term is up?
It's just, this appointment will just be until the next annual election.
I know the appointment will be. I'm interested, in some cases, what I'm getting at, in some cases, when someone steps in to fill an incomplete term like this, there's a commitment that I'm not running for election, put me in here, and it's just a clean replacement.
I wouldn't be standing in front of you today if I didn't think that this is something that I had considered, and it happened to be an opportunity which, I don't know if it makes it better or worse, that this is the process, but I definitely, would
Okay.
be around.
So, same. I actually had pulled papers and gotten all of my required signatures in the past. My husband had some health issues that are resolved, so it wasn't the right time.
Okay, okay, thank you. Again, for each of you, a question. I assume if you're ready to join the school committee, you've spent enough time watching and observing the school committee and how it operates and have some familiarity with the members of the school committee. How do you see yourself adding some different capability? You know, are you just picking up another oar in the boat, or are you bringing something unique, different, supplemental to the current configuration of the school committee?
I think I sort of alluded to my expertise in my area and me really wanting to focus on the student services end of things. I also think sometimes we've gotten caught. I was at a school committee meeting where we were talking about the new homework policy that I'm sure you're, and I expressed concerns at that, just at sort of the roller coaster of homework loads that my child has gotten. The most was in 2nd grade, and now he's in 5th, so that's enough said. So I think it's just trying to make sure too, sometimes, and it's in all educational systems, but sometimes we put in policies, but the policy gets there and then it kind of goes down, but then implementation and follow-up gets lost, if that makes any sense. So even though the actual policy is great, the intent behind the policy is great, everyone believes in it, but sometimes the actual execution of it can be
So you'll be
not-
bringing that kind
So,
of.
so I would I'd be liking to ask questions of where the support is of the principals and how do we know teachers know that they're actually following it? How do we know teachers are getting it? How do we make sure that it is trickling down what we think should be trickling down?
Okay.
And also the budget, just a closer look at that.
Okay. I'm looking at the committee right now, and I was a former.
Put them on the spot with that question, you know.
I don't see anybody that was a teacher themselves. I don't think. Okay. So
It was a long time ago.
okay.
I had hair.
It was a long time ago for me as well, but when I became a parent, I became a better teacher. And by being on the school committee, I feel like having been in the trenches, so to speak, I have a more keen awareness of what the teachers are going through on a day-by-day in their classrooms or with administration and so forth. And having 3 children, 3 very, very different children. I know everybody says it, but they couldn't be more different than each other, and they've all had different experiences at each of the different levels of school. And just being able to be a voice for them and some of the educational pedagogy that is going through Medfield, even at this time in the various schools, that would be the role that I would want to be most.
Okay. Great. One last question. How did you find out about this opening?
There was an email that came, I believe it was from Dr. Marsden, announcing that there was a vacancy.
And
Was that just to you or to everybody?
Well, I was actually at the last school committee meeting where Tim Bonafanti retired. And it was then announced that
So you
a
knew
letter
at
of
that
interest, yes. And then there was a follow-up email, I think, the next day.
Okay.
I don't know who it went to, but I thought it was everybody in the entire.
It was who?
2,800 people got the email.
I'll come back. So let's get the second question, and I'll.
So yes, I believe the email was signed from the school committee, but I think Jeff was the one that, Dr. Mars was the one that, sent it out.
First, thank both of you for being willing to step forward. So my comment here is not directed at the two of you, but and this doesn't change the election. But I want to express a concern, and I guess I want to express a concern to the school committee and those who are interested. I was aware that Tim Bonfatti had stepped down, so I knew that, but the first actual public communication I saw was a patch article late yesterday morning. The school committee's a little different than putting a replacement in for someone who steps down from a zoning board or something like that. As 2/3 of the town's budget being controlled or essentially overseen by the school committee, this is actually a really important decision, who is on the school committee and what they do. My perspective on this is that while it may be that certain people actually did get this communication, the broad knowledge of the town with the opportunity for people who were interested in stepping in, I knew because I knew, but I never saw that invitation. I knew that we were having an election, but I never saw that invitation. And I don't think that's really the right way we should go about replacing school committee members. And this is a message about the future, not about tonight. I am personally disappointed that Tim Bonfatti, who was the one senior representative on the school committee, is gone. And now I don't think, unless any of you are stepping into the breach on the seniors, the schools, on one hand, the school committee has a job to make sure that education for this town's children is good. And it has fulfilled that in the 24 years that I've been here. But the town also has other people who pay the taxes to pay for this. And a school committee that doesn't have that voice, I mean, I was probably somewhat of the attack dog last cycle. But the point isn't because I don't like the schools or I don't want the education. The point is, this town is more than just families who came to Medfield because they like the schools and they want the kids to go through a good school. This town has people in it that support those schools. Some of them have been vocal in their support, who had kids that went through a long time ago. And what I see us doing here is losing that at least potential voice of the senior. I think that's a mistake, not because of the two of you, but our process of doing that and of not really making it as public and as open for people who wanted to step forward is a flawed process that I'm not going to stop here now, but I would hope we don't do it this way in the future.
Right. Well, if I can speak to that briefly, because I had an exchange with Chris about this and with Christine about it. And so I think that's more of a Board of Selectmen issue than a school committee issue, in that, I should have noted when we talked about this, what was it, a month ago, I should have asked Christine and Evelyn to post it on our webpage as well. And I didn't. It just was an oversight, and I didn't do my meeting summary for that one, so I couldn't get my personal note out about it. So I think from the school committee standpoint, they sent an email to everybody who has somebody in the schools, right? So I don't know that the school committee necessarily has access to a broader piece of it. I think from our perspective, we should, for any of these kind of things, it's broader than just a special election, for when we have a schedule for something, we shouldn't wait until the state statutory deadline for giving notice to just put it up there, right? Because we had this scheduled since, I don't know, when did we talk about it? September 18th or something like that. So that's on me for not directing Christine and Evelyn to do it. I don't know that the school committee, I think sending an email to everybody on the school committee list, that's certainly above and beyond what's required for this. And I think some of it from our end as well is that I think it's terrific that we actually have two people who step forward to this, because most of the time when we have these vacancies, you sort of have to drag someone desperately to fill it. And so I think just thank you to both of you for stepping forward, and I hope whichever one of you is not chosen, this is not the end of your interest in serving on the school committee, because for most of the time, some of the elections are hotly contested, some of them aren't at all. And so I think thank you very much for both of you for stepping forward on it. But I think on that point, I wouldn't necessarily ding the school committee on this, I would ding us, because this is a joint thing for us for not posting this when we had it scheduled.
So Evelyn, for the record, I'm stating that I'm really glad I didn't throw a railroad tie in this whole process, seeing as it's Chairman Martucci's fault.
Yes, I will take the blame for not directing them to put it on the website. Although I will note that when that came up, you did have a microphone in front of you as well, and you could have said what you also, which you have not been afraid to use during our time together. And so,
Thank you.
May I also make one more note?
Yeah, sure. Oh, well, you have to have a microphone if you'd like to speak.
Anybody got a microphone? I also want to say that this is a process right now for a temporary fulfillment of a term, but there are school committee elections almost every year. And so I would think that if people are interested, and that is a regular and recurring thing within our town, that people definitely know that there's a possibility to be on school committee at that point if they want to, so.
No, Jerry is next.
Jerry Potts, 7 Kerr Street. I'm actively uninterested in blame, but I am very interested in the process. I was at the first school committee meeting that started this year, which was well before the 14th, and Tim announced then that he was going to be retiring. So that was in early September. The fact that there was no communication about this beyond just to the parents is troubling. And I agree with Gus. I think this is a major position. The last election had very active participation for this position that Leo may. Did you remember that, Leo? There was a few folks who came out. And this has been a position where there's a lot of interest because of budget, because of concerns in town on sort of the cost side of it. And so while it's wonderful to have a couple of people, I do feel that this one, and I don't actually blame the selectmen. I think all the way around, from the very first time this was mentioned, there was no information that was really made public beyond the original email that went out on that. Even what the process would be, there was confusion on it. There was a communication that there was a deadline for it, but then, Mike, you said it could be nominations from the floor. So somewhere in this process, it is a very visible position, and I just would encourage transparency across the board wherever possible. Everyone's busy. There's a lot of good people who volunteer, and the selectmen have honestly done a wonderful job over the last couple of years about minutes, about making sure that the agendas are out there. So, but I do agree with Gus on this one. This is an important position, and it seems like a lot of things could have been done better.
In light of Chairman Marcucci's comments, I will say that although probably my comments were directed toward the school committee, they shouldn't have been. I accept that we should.
No, I'll deflect the blame back to them. Okay. That's back it on the floor. I will do that, yeah. Sure. I think this Chris was first, though, next.
All right.
Then, all right.
Chris Potts from 7 Curve Street. I just also, just on the timeline, I think it's really important to note that September 4th was the date when Tim announced that he'd be resigning at the next meeting. The letter that came in for this, for one of the applicants, Megan Glenn, was dated, I believe, September 13th or 14th, and then the formal resignation took place on the 17th, and that was when that became public. So information had gotten out before that meeting. It must have been shared by whoever had been at that September 4th meeting. So
I thought you had told me, though, I thought that Tim had announced it at the September 4th meeting.
He did.
Right.
But there wasn't any public communication.
Right. Was it
It wasn't on the next agenda. So for example, the school committee did not list on the agenda that was even a topic for discussion.
Right. But was it a public meeting on the 4th, or was that an executive session?
It was a public meeting.
Public meeting.
Microphone. Just
I
to
think we all
clarify,
heard him, though.
yeah, the second, well, they didn't at home. Although they probably did. I have a loud voice. The agenda for the school committee meeting, the next one, where I actually didn't go to it because I didn't see it on the agenda. I was very interested in this topic. Didn't list that they were going to be discussing the resignation, which I think is a major miss. That's a major position that was not on a public agenda. So,
And I can't speak to that, obviously. Now you.
I'll let you in then.
Thank you. Chris Morrison, 9 Gary Drive. I'm on my 9th year in the school committee. I guess first of all, I'd just like to say, whatever happened between the 4th and the 14th, I can assure you, Gus, that I was advocating strongly to Tim to reconsider. And so that, that's, and I'd hoped he would. Tim's been a mentor to me my entire time on the school committee. We share our name on the ballot every time we're on. And all I want to say is before we cast any vote tonight, I think it's important to acknowledge his service. I'll defend his honor and say I don't think he thinks of himself as a senior, although I know you meant it as a compliment.
I did.
But Tim served with distinction. He was actually appointed through this same process when Steve Kramer resigned from the school committee. He continues to serve on the permanent building construction committee.
Close enough.
Close enough?
on the name of that committee, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I never get it right. But he served on that for quite some time, and I know with the school building projects upcoming, I know he's got a lot more work that will come there, and that's informed his decision. So I just, personally, before we cast any vote to put somebody in his seat, I want to state publicly, we won't find anybody to replace him, because Tim has been a dedicated servant for a long time. And it was just, in his mind, time to step back. He'd been on the school committee the entire time he had kids through the schools. He graduated his youngest, I think, last year, continued to serve. So I just publicly want to thank him. I think the nonsense about when he formally resigned and didn't is just that, but I think it's nonsense.
Really?
Yes.
All right. Anything further from anybody?
I just want clarification
NA.
in terms of why it wasn't put on the agenda. Because, yes, Tim announced his resignation on the 4th, and by the next school committee meeting, we had, I wanted to find out exactly the process of how to replace a departing midterm school committee member. So the very day of the school committee, which I think was September 17th, I had a conference call with Dr. Marsden and our school committee council just to go through the process. And I thought I got it right, but, and we also, so I didn't put it on the agenda because I wanted the facts first, so I'm sorry. And so that was really the process. And I chose the 12th because I thought I was going to get inundated with letters of interest, so I wanted the weekend to give everybody fair chance to review it, the Board of Selectmen and school committee members. But alas, we got one letter by that deadline. All right, thank you.
And I can just note on the process, and Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, the statute is not crystal clear on the process. And the process we followed tonight is the one we've always followed in filling vacancies, because the statute does say special elections, so we kind of follow what would be the election process with nominations and then roll call vote and all of that. I mean, that's not spelled out perfectly clearly in the statute. And I think as we work on developing town and our policies and procedures, this is something that will be spelled out in greater detail as we put those together as well, so that we understand it. I mean, because this is just sort of the way. So I understand the confusion around it, just given the fact that other than Bill Massaro and whoever watches these meetings regularly, you probably haven't seen us do this. I think we filled an assessor's vacancy like this a couple of years ago. The trust fund as well. We've done a couple of these, over the course of the last couple of years. And it was new to me as well when we started doing it this way. So, but Mark, I know this is the way we've done it traditionally in following the statute. So.
The municipal building stabilization fund was very confusing with that too. That was another one we had to wrestle with.
I recall that as well. So, and I will just say, with respect to the concerns with the process, I don't think the process reflects poorly on either Dr. Chamberlain or Ms. Glenn. I think, both of you are commended for coming here. I think we can all work to get better at these processes. We can all work to get better at doing this sort of thing. Hopefully, we're not going to have a raft of resignations. We're not going to have to do this a lot. But if we do, we'll do the best we can to make sure that things get posted well in advance of whatever's the mandatory minimum required by the state statute, which is substantially less than you would expect, just given the nature of the position. So unless there are further comments, I will ask the clerk of the Board of Selectmen to call the roll of eligible voters, beginning with the members of the school committee.
Could we just, I'd be curious to hear the votes of the school committee first.
That's what I said. I was having call the roll.
Oh, of the school committee.
That would be the typical practice
That's
anyway.
typical practice.
I thought their clerk called their people.
Nope, I'm gonna have,
All right.
Gus is sitting up here. He has the microphone, so he's gonna call the roll, beginning with the school committee members. I assume you know all of their names.
Yes. Is there any particular order? Should I?
I think they should have the microphone to pass it down, so I would start down there so they can proceed this way with the microphone.
Chris Morrison,
Megan Glenn.
Adam A. Shapebrook,
Megan Glenn.
Jessica Riley,
Megan Glenn.
Leo Breen,
Megan Glenn.
Okay.
Selectman Peterson,
I'll vote for Megan Glenn as well then.
and Chairman Martucci.
Well, I guess that's majority having spoken, I'll vote for Megan Glenn as well.
And Selectman Murby, I will vote for Dr. Chamberlain for no other reason than she stood up.
I appreciate your standing up too, and if my vote had not been meaningless at this point, I would have considered voting for you as well. Thank you for stepping forward.
Okay, thank you to you both.
There will be a position open on the March ballot to complete this term if it's not already expiring. I don't know
It
what.
is expiring.
Oh, it is?
It's expiring in March.
And now that the voting is over, can I then congratulate Megan Glenn on her election?
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's it, I think.
So she needs to take the oath of office from the town clerk before she assumes her position?
Assuming the town clerk's not here right now. but-
No, but
It's nice to see the front row occupied for a
It is
change.
nice to see the front row occupied.
Mike?
Want us to move up there?
Please do. Please do.
Nice socks.
He's got about a dozen socks.
She moved me forward. That never happens.
All right, so our next item would have been the Medfield Energy Committee. They have asked to take off the agenda item to sign the purchase and sale agreement and license with Eversource, so we'll push that off. Cyclocross Racing, is Greg here?
Yes, Greg and I talked today, he can't be here, so I will present his agreement for him. The Building and Grounds Committee approved this unanimously last week to go forward with this. We came up with a list of conditions, particularly where this is the first one. We did try and get the date moved to Sunday, but they were not able to move the date till Sunday. We are still concerned about staffing levels with the holiday stroll and the tree lighting the night before. But we all agreed we would work together to make this happen on Saturday. This is our standard license agreement that we've had with the companies that use the property. One of the concerns that we have, that Greg and I were talking about today, is the serving of alcohol on site. They've asked for tailgating on site, to which they would apply for an entertainment license to do that. But the issue is time, because their race is 9 to 4. Typically, the first race ends around 10 a.m., and they would like to be allowed to do tailgating at 10 o'clock. Now, my concern with that is we just recently denied the New Life, when they did their road race, for serving samples of beer in the morning. So I told them I would present that to you, and I would leave it up to you to make the decision on that, but they agreed to all the other terms of the license agreement.
So they have not agreed to the no alcohol before noon policy?
They would like to have it at 10 a.m. I had suggested noon, they suggested 10, since that's when their first heat concludes.
Somewhere in the world.
Your sound, I'm getting the best
Time
way you like
somewhere
to
in
talk.
Well,
So,
no,
Unless you would like to start, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
First up, I will listen to the opinions of the two of you, but I'll make it, because I was the one that started, I think, on the prohibition for the race. There are two factors here that at least would let me consider being more flexible. The first one is, in the race that we were talking about, there was a commercial operation promoting beer at the end of the race. Second, that race was something which really included a lot of, children, young people in the race itself. So there was this, now that may be there's going to be young people in this race as well. I feel a little bit differently about people bringing their own refreshments and tailgating as they see fit. So I could be talked out of the noontime rule that I had before, in light of the fact this is not a sale, it's not a promotion, it's just people doing what they do. If they, I suspect if they tailgate and somebody brings beer and they put it into a cup, we're not gonna be policing what's in their cups to make sure, so I can be swayed on it. All depends what kind of beer they're drinking. No, so I'm not as hard up on this one for those two reasons. But I will listen to your two opinions on it.
So my take on this is I would have been in favor of the other one, but I think having set down that marker, I think that's slicing the salami pretty thin from my perspective. And so I think if we're going to establish the idea, if we're going to have events like this at the hospital, and I think your position on the other one was well taken. I think that it's a family event, it's an athletic event, and it's not necessarily the best example to have the alcohol in the morning. And so I would stick with the noon. I think that's a consistent policy that we can have. I understand the differences that you're citing, they're not non-substantive, but I think, having gone down that route, I think we should stick with it. So that's where I would be on the noon.
I think drawing the line, the way you've drawn it, makes sense, Mike. too.
I'm on board.
Are they looking for a vote on this tonight?
They would like a vote on this tonight so they can start promoting the event.
This looks like the standard.
It's our standard. The only thing we are requiring, due to the number of people who will be attending, we are requiring 2 details on site, one for parking and one for on-site management. They anticipate
Police details or just?
2 police details, yep, and that we can fill with special police officers but given the number of people that will be attending the event and it's going to have open tailgating, we thought that was the best.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
And it's the standard $2,000.
Correct, yep.
Chris, what happens with like Polo in the Country? They have tailgating, do they,
They don't tailgate on our property.
it's their own property?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't think they have any alcohol there.
Oh, yes, they do. I don't think sherry is alcohol.
Any more discussion on the contract? And
Yeah.
other than that, I think it looks fine to me. I mean, I think this is, I'm glad we can try to make this happen.
Yeah.
And I assume Buildings and Grounds, because they think the grass and everything will be okay.
There was some concern about the grass. They've agreed that if there is damage, they will come back and reseed the area, or we will reseed it and bill them for it.
It creates a problem because of the timing of the race, because the fix won't happen until the spring.
Right.
So it'll be a mess the whole winter if it's a mess.
The other issue is if it snows, but I think we've worked out a reasonable explanation for that. Bill just questioned, we couldn't have been more strict with them about staying off of the cap with their bicycles. We don't want them on the overlook, we don't want them on the state property, and they've all agreed. If they deviate from the race course, they're disqualified. They're using this course to qualify for the next race in the spring, so we should be able to keep everybody.
It's a strong incentive.
That's a very strong incentive.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Mr. Clerk, do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the license agreement with for the use of the Medfield State Hospital for the cyclocross race scheduled for December, or the license running from December 7th, 8th, and 9th of 2018.
And you're granting a permit for this event? Because
Right, and the entertainment permit.
And the entertainment. Oh, this is all being done in this one thing.
All in
And
one thing.
granting,
subject to agreed upon conditions or?
so the way the contract reads, item 3B is application to the BOS for an entertainment license. Is this the application?
I don't know.
What are we?
We don't have an
approving?
application. They usually just come before us with an email and ask for the entertainment license, so I'm asking on their behalf.
Okay.
And that's what's
so we're-
needed in order to be able to have the alcohol at all.
So I'm moving that we do 2 things, one, sign the
Yes.
license agreement and grant the entertainment.
Grant the
license.
entertainment.
Okay. I move that we approve the license agreement for the use of the Medfield State Hospital property for the cyclocross race event to take place over the dates December 7th, 8th, and 9th, 2018, and that we grant the entertainment license to authorize tailgating afternoon time at that event, subject to the conditions contained in the contract.
Second. All in favor?
Good job.
I'm getting better at this.
Thank you.
That is signed.
I'll take that.
Better, you're chairman next year.
Nothing, I assume no citizen comment sign in? Nope. Okay. Action item, vote to authorize Town Administrator Sullivan to sign Police Department grant application. This is for grant application for additional equipment.
Go Packs.
Go packs related to
And,
school.
and helmets,
and
they're,
protection,
yeah.
helmets, and all of that.
Technically, the reason, it normally would be the chief executive officer, which would be the chairman of the selectmen, but the application is due tomorrow, and everything was made out with my name on it, so I'm just asking to go ahead with that, give me
I think
authority.
it's fine. The only question I had about this, and I'm fine with it, but I assume the intended use here is sort of in the case of extreme circumstances.
Yes, it's not for your ordinary,
It's not gonna become more of a routine.
they're not gonna have helmeted police walking around their school campuses, yeah.
Because I mean, that has been an issue in some communities. I don't think it's an issue
and-
here, but there has been, the sort of ratcheting up of the kind of equipment that local police
Yes.
have. And I
And,
want to make sure that this is going to be used for those extreme, it's not going to become part of the routine.
There will be a set in each cruiser in the event that, and the, apparently the Kevlar vests that have been the traditional vests that the police wear, they will not stop penetration of certain types of bullets, and this one will. So it's a stronger material that for the vest, and then the helmet protects shots to the head.
I just wanted to note that if the use is going to move beyond what is here, I want to have this.
No, it's just for extreme emergency. Yeah.
It sounded entirely to me that it was just a way of putting everything into a duffel bag and having it there ready to, in
And
case there was
each cruiser will have one in it, yeah.
They just had to grab the bag and were set to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So it'll just stay in the trunk.
Yeah.
All right, do we have any other questions or motion?
I assume they have to pull the MRAP application. Vehicle.
That's good, because I already signed it. I think it went in today.
So I move that we.
I didn't know this is being video recorded, Mr. Sullivan.
I move that we authorize Town Administrator Sullivan to sign the Police Department grant application.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. Yep.
We can come back around to the special town meeting articles and Board of Selectmen position. This is just an announcement. The Plastic Bag Reduction Initiative Group invites the selectmen and the community to the screening of the film Bag It, Thursday, October 25th, 2018, 7 p.m. at the United Church of Christ.
That would be one of the great movie names of all time.
Bag It.
Mr. Chairman, you skipped over an item too. I don't know if you meant to do that.
The special town meeting articles?
Last time in January.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not mean to do that. You know what, I already checked it off and didn't say it, so thank you
You're
very
moving
much.
faster than we are, sir.
That's the veteran selectman leadership right there from our senior selectman on that reminding there. Okay, this is a question to vote to authorize Town Administrator Sullivan to sign monthly contribution rates for MedX 2 for the period January 1st, 2019. This says January 21st, 2019 to December 31st, 2018. I
Yes.
assume it should be 2019. It's for the year 2019.
It's no, those are the, 19 it is, right, sorry.
Way back one day.
Yeah.
One day. I guess we have a wild New Year's Eve in town. Special.
The last contract only went to December 30th, 2000.
Right, so December 31st, 2019.
Yeah, the Medicare plans go on a calendar year to tie in with the Medicare renewal, whereas the active employees plans are fiscal year.
Okay.
So, and one went up, that one didn't go up at all. The Tufts plan just came in this week, and that went up $3 or 1%. So they both came in very good for next year, yeah. Tufts plan is very small, we only have 9 members. The other one that didn't go up at all is the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan.
Forecast some of the lower health rates increases in the future.
Yeah,
The other
yeah.
plans.
We've done very well on those Medicare plans, though they haven't gone, the supplemental plans, they haven't gone up that much over the last 3 years.
I move that we vote to authorize Town Administrator Sullivan to sign the monthly contribution rates for MedX 2 for the timeframe January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
All right, let's go to just the next contract so we can clear this out of the way. Vote to authorize me to sign the town's hazard mitigation plan contract. This is a scope of work for the town of Medfield preparing a hazard mitigation plan update in accordance with FEMA guidelines for hazard mitigation planning. We'll be assisted by a vendor for this scope of work. The town's updated plan will address mitigation of multiple natural hazards that may affect the community, including flood hazards, winter storm hazards, wind hazards, wildfire hazards, and geologic hazards. Assume that means earthquakes.
It's a dangerous town.
Yeah. All right, any questions on this one?
They had their first meeting this afternoon, so that's, they are talking about having a presentation format sometime in January. So,
And this
that-
is an agreement with the state.
Yes, yeah, and it's an update of an existing plan that you need to qualify for emergency fundings like we get when we had some of the blizzards or that heavy year of snowstorms 3 years ago. We got quite a bit of money. In fact, we're getting money this year for the March snowstorms. So,
And this is a grant from the state to hire a vendor to assist us updating this plan.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
I should say I was skeptical when I first looked at the plan because it looked like it was a state-sponsored program to guard against things that I wasn't sure mattered to us. But when I saw the list of items that you had, that it was helping us with the actual things that we're talking about, made it
Makes sense, yeah. The one thing I was surprised at, I thought with the hazard mitigation plan, I thought they should include the railroad passing through the town, and they said that isn't covered by this particular
You mean like a
program.
spill?
It is, yes, yeah.
For a flood.
But they said this is only environmental. Well, it seems to me chemicals on a train would be environmental, but
Not until they spill. Yeah,
Right.
okay. Ready?
Yep.
Okay, I move that we authorize Chairman Marcucci to sign the town's hazard mitigation plan contract.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So the licenses and permit on the consent agenda. Any objections to anything on the consent agenda?
I have one, just a comment, not objections to anything on this, but I would make one comment, and I hesitate to do it only because I'm not trying to start a problem. But when I drive through town, there are loads of signs on the side of the road that are semi-permanent signs that we don't seem to do much about, but we make people who choose to abide by our rules do this. And I'll just make that observation and suggest that as you're driving through town, pay attention to those signs that, it's like, I don't know if it's that we're not enforcing it, or I think it's that we're not enforcing
It is.
those
It
signs
is,
where
yeah.
people just, if all these people just decided to do these things.
So Gus, my suggestion in the past has been that we author or direct either the police or the DPW to enforce the signs as they drive around.
Having
They're the ones that are driving around the town all the time.
Having said that, some of the signs which seem to be for permanent commercial operations, I'd be more than happy to explore ways they could actually put up better signs that would, I'd be inclined to be flexible with them and putting up nicer signs advertising their businesses.
We have a bylaw that absolutely prohibits any signage in the right-of-way, except for the designated locations where they come through here, get a permit for an event.
So some of these are on this, let me give you an example, I think that I saw just this weekend. Boy Scouts and other places, they'll ask for permission to put a sign up at the entrance to the transfer station. But there was a Powasset Farm Harvest Fest sign, and I'm all for it, it's a great thing, but we never authorized that, and it's just one of those little folding signs. So my point is that some people are cooperating and others are not, and it feels like we don't ever act together on that one.
Yeah.
what's the situation on real estate signs, Mark? Are they permitted by state law?
No.
They're not, so they would, a real estate?
Well, you get two issues. You get the zoning bylaw, the sign bylaw, which applies to private property. And that probably addresses temporary signs. And then you've got the town right-of-way, which is not subject to zoning. It's in and of itself, it's a proprietary thing, and the selectmen, on my recommendation, have determined that they're not gonna allow any signage other than some limited announcements. And again, that's so that you're not opening it up for anything, which is, it becomes an all-or-nothing proposition.
So
So
if it's
it'd
on
be-
the side of the road at the entrance to the transfer station, it's not in the right of way.
Well, that's the transfer station property, that's a
Okay.
separate issue.
Separate. So they can, okay.
Whoever's got control of the transfer station should be focusing on what's permissible and what's not.
Problem is sometimes it's difficult to tell where the edge of the layout is.
Yeah.
It can go,
And like I said, I'm not trying to
Well,
start a
and
big
people
fight
run
on
around
this.
and they throw up signs of
this
all
is-
kinds, whether it's a
Yeah.
nonprofit event or it's some kind of real estate promotion, what have you, they just do it. And so if you're basically bound to enforce it or it's going to continue to happen.
we had one a couple of years ago when they parked the car at the intersection of North and Main Street with a sign on top of the car, and they said that was legal because Papagino's does it, and this was, I think, for car detailing.
Yeah, I remember that. Okay, it was an editorial comment.
Laurel, did you have a comment? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I decided not to.
Oh. All right, Just out of curiosity, the bylaw you're talking about just applies to the right-of-way, it doesn't apply to private residents
Correct.
or private businesses.
That's the zoning bylaw. There is a sign bylaw portion of the zoning bylaw, which would apply to that.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the items on the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's circle back to special town meeting articles and Board of Selectmen position articles. I put this on here in case anybody had anything to talk about. I don't know that anybody's have anything to talk about.
I do, when you're ready.
I meant Peter Gus, but okay, if you have something to add, Mark, that's okay.
We usually try, because we're not doing a mailing on the warrant, in the warrant report, we put a explanation of the articles and the warrant committee vote. And I know in the past, the selectmen have felt if they have taken a vote, we ought to put the selectmen's vote in that as well. So if you take votes on these articles tonight, we can include that in the handout that will be at a town meeting. But this will be the last opportunity you have. I think after this, it has to get printed and for distribution.
Right, so I mean, we had talked about our positions on the articles the last time, if we want a formal vote on them. I will say, I noted, I see Sharon Tatro in the back, and I don't know if she's here to talk about the articles she's working on. I mean, Sharon's raised a couple of issues with respect to the speed, Articles 1 and Article 2, that I thought were very good points. And so, I know she's still,
If you want me to, I was just here in case anybody had any questions. I brought one.
yeah, so I think, and I had said to Sharon in our discussion that these are two articles that, because we're having a special town meeting, we added them to the warrant. There's no particular urgency on them, and so, as far as my position on them, or our position on them, I don't know if you want to talk just a little bit about, is that what you want to talk about too, Mark? All right, so, Mark, do you want to start? And then
Yeah.
Sharon can,
This is, and I give full credit to Sharon for bringing to my attention. These two articles, actually the two statutes that are referenced in the articles, the local adoption or local acceptance statutes, which were included in the Municipal Modernization Act. The Municipal Modernization Act basically was pushed by the Department of Revenue as a way to assist municipalities and update things. To a greater or lesser degree, other state agencies may or may not have been on board, and this is one example. Because the two statutes are self-contained, and they make it very clear that once they're adopted, without further authorization, that's the wording in both statutes, the selectmen may establish either the speed, either the thickly settled or the safety zone. Now, what happened is, Mass DOT, who has had jurisdiction over this, apparently was not happy with that situation. There is another broad statute which requires you to get their approval for any kind of signage, traffic controls, what have you, virtually every situation. There's some very narrow exceptions in the statute. What they've done, and which Sharon brought to my attention, is they sent out a memorandum to local municipalities after these two statutes were passed, saying, oh, we want to direct your attention to Chapter 90, Section 2. We've got broad overall authority here, and you've still got to comply with that, and therefore, all the signage, everything has to comply. And if it doesn't, you're risking your Chapter 90 reimbursement. That's what they've got that, they're holding it over your head. Now, that's just classic bureaucratic pushback. I think it calls for a political solution. I leave that to you folks to, if you choose to bring our legislators into this process or not, but that was clearly not the intent of the legislature. The purpose of those two statutes, as they passed, was to cut through this bureaucratic red tape and allow municipalities to decide for themselves what their speed zone should be. Mass DOT is apparently just
Sounds like what we were talking about earlier with this, the election, how confusing it is.
So what's the issue there, Mark, that we would perhaps need to change our signage in town?
No, Mass DOT is requiring, as under the full authority of the Section 2, that there be engineering studies and all kinds of things, because the statute gives them authority over signage, and a fair reading, if you're trying to reconcile, and as an attorney, you know, reading various sections of a statute, the first thing you try to do is reconcile sections that appear to be in conflict. pretty clear to me that section 2 is talking about signs literally in terms of what its measurements and coloration, that sort of thing should be. They're taking a broad reading and saying, no, this gives us full authority, and before you even establish these zones, you've got to do engineering studies, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to get our approval. And if you don't, and I said, if that were all were, fine, you could do it anyway. But the risk is that they're gonna withhold your chapter 90 funds.
I think Boston went ahead and changed their speed limits, so if they're gonna withhold Chapter 90 funds from Boston, good luck to them.
Well, it's gonna come to a head, I suspect. There is, on the other side, I understand there are municipalities that have adopted a safety zone for the entire town. They put everything at a ridiculously low speed limit.
It-
So,
Just to
Sharon?
clarify, I think that there's two very different articles. So Article 1 is the one that would lower the 35 to a 25. And the way that that is kind of intended, and there are two Mass DOT manuals. There's one that's a frequently asked questions that they did, and there's one that's like a 25-pager. Happy to leave you copies. They're actually in really simple English, so they're actually kind of a joy to read compared to the laws themselves. But the first one, the signage that is required for that, that's the one where you can pick certain pieces of thickly settled or business districts to lower them. It's like a false positive with signage. So they would want you to put a sign on the outskirts of town that says, town-wide, we are 25. And then now you have to change the signs to anything that's above 25. So it's odd. But that's how that is. The Article 2 has the word safety zone in it, and that's where you get into the trouble with all these engineering studies, because basically the chapter that didn't change, basically this chapter 85, section 2, the one that says that it basically says if you don't follow the rules, and one of the rules that is listed there is a manual that's done by the Federal Transportation Commission. It's 900 pages, literally. I did not print it. If you don't follow that manual, and that manual is what requires you, if you want to do a safety zone, to have a full engineering study done, and then all of the special signage for that. If you don't do that, the punishment is loss of your Chapter 90 funds. So both of these things, I just think that they're a larger nut to think about. There are references in these documents that talk about having to put a lot of this stuff into your municipal traffic code, which I did ask for a copy of that we haven't looked at in 25 years, so we might want to look at that first. So what I will be saying at the warrant committee meeting next week when we meet is that these may have some validity on their face, but I think that we need some more time. I think we need to have a safety committee look at it. I think we need to figure out exactly what we have to do before the power is given to you guys to be able to change any of these things, so we fully understand it, because it's clearly a larger problem with bigger penalties than I think.
Well, it's certainly,
I think the solution is to go to the legislators and bring to their attention what Mass DOT did, because it's contrary to what the legislative intent was, and if necessary, gets either politically get Mass DOT on board, or if necessary, pass clarifying legislation that
Well,
forces
certainly-
the issue.
sounds to me in the interim that the more prudent course, though, is to dismiss these articles at the special town meeting and put them off to the annual town meeting, or until we've resolved these issues with our legislature.
It sounded,
I think you had the right idea, Pete, let Boston fight it out with the DOT.
it sounded to me from Sharon, although that it's just Article 2 that risks the Chapter 90 funds. Article 1 does not.
Well, no, the signage is, that goes to both.
It does, okay.
Article 2 is the one that requires engineering studies. Article 1 is the false positive on the signage. So they both risk Chapter 90 funds, and I think, and just as a side note, we're already overspent on the signage budget this year, so we might want to think about that.
So the question I guess I have on this one, when we dealt with the marijuana issues, we passed multiple articles under belt and suspenders theory that said, well, we're just going to pass everything we could possibly pass, and if we put these all there, collectively, one or more of these is going to stop this. If we pass these, recognizing that we have this legislative conflict, and simply authorized ourselves to do this because the Municipal Modernization Act allows us to do it, but then didn't act on it until the legislators had resolved the issue with DOT. Is that a more expeditious thing for us? You know, in other words, if that conflict was gone, is there a reason we wouldn't do this?
You could accept the statutes and then just wait to
Just
see
not do
what happens,
anything.
yeah.
And I'm only looking for the most expeditious path through this little snarl. I'm not trying to.
It only
push-
kicks in when you actually start to implement.
If we didn't pass this and we wanted to establish a safety zone, I'm thinking that the safety zone we want in town is in a relatively defined and limited area. What if we didn't pass any of this and we wanted to have a safety zone through normal procedures right now?
Then
What
you
would
have to
we
go to Mass DOT and basically throw yourself at, they'll require all kinds of backup engineering studies and documentation. They'll make a decision. And that, it's an elaborate, extended process.
But
And you may
What
not
makes
get
it a
the,
safety zone is just designating the speed limit, or is there another?
anything relating to your roads generally, for instance, if you wanted to prohibit through trucking, or limit the weight of vehicles, or certain types of signage, speed zones, all that sort of thing, that's under their authority under this statute. As I said, it's a blanket statute with a few exceptions written in as to what you can do without getting their permission.
And before the Municipal Modernization Act, one of the studies you had to do was you had to do a traffic study and find out what speeds people were going.
Yes.
And you couldn't make the speed limit below the 85% threshold. And the reality was that they were all driving faster than you.
So it would actually go up, the speed would go up. and-
Lower the speed limits.
Yeah.
Those are all the things that are covered in the very lovely 900-page manual.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I interpret it is basically these statutes that you can accept makes it so the buck stops with you rather than the buck stops with the state. It does not get rid of the process of the engineering study, but if you screw it up, it's on you.
The manual
There's
is,
a
the
bigger risk
manual
here.
is a tool. It's used because it said, among other things, standardized signage and stuff is in that manual. There may be a whole lot of other stuff in there to fill up that.
Yeah.
But it is, it depends what the purpose is for which you're referencing it. It's referenced all the time, for standard striping and standard signage and all that sort of thing.
Sharon, you just said something that's important to me. You just said if we let's pretend that conflict's not here. We pass these two articles and we act on those two articles, it's the town assuming the
That's correct.
liability for that action as opposed to leaving it with DOT.
Yes.
So that's, to me, is actually the issue, whether we want to pass it or not, is whether we want to actually enable ourselves
And there's
to
a,
expose ourselves to that.
I've been trying to find out what other towns have taken these statutes. There is a handful of ones that have all done Article 1. I have not been able to find a town that has done Article 2. But Article 1, you have to report to the state that you've chosen to do Article 1. Article 2, you don't, which is weird. But I haven't been able to find someone that did Article 2. There's lots of stuff if you Google about Article 1. I specifically found, the documents that they passed out at town meeting in Lexington, Concord, and Bedford when they all talked about it. So there is at least a decent amount of information out there on Article 1.
I mean, I understand that there's a proper way to do it, and then there's a way a whole lot of municipalities do it, which is they just go out and slap up signage, whether it's stop signs or speed zones or whatever, which is why putting my hat on as a criminal defense attorney, when I've done that in the past, and somebody was picked up on something, I always said the first thing you do is request the backup documentation, because 99 times out of 100, you'll find that they didn't properly implement whatever it is that you've been charged with.
So I guess where I come out of this is the same place, which is there's enough uncertainty here, and I would not want to be asking the town meeting to give the Board of Selectmen authority without understanding kind of the full implications of it. And so I think there are enough open questions here. I think I would change my view on these two articles and suggest that we probably ought to dismiss them at the special town meeting. And I think we can keep working on them and figure out if this gets sorted out, or our legislative delegation can make some presumably this is going to be an issue for multiple towns.
Right.
And for towns that want to do this, and so hopefully, Boston aside, which kind of gets treated as its own thing sometimes, there should be enough push to get this sorted out, that maybe by April it'll be sorted out, and we can push this off onto that.
I don't think it's that hard to sort it out. I just think it needs more time.
I think more time.
Thanks, Sharon.
You're welcome.
So our position on number 1, 2, Pete, do you disagree?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so I think, do you want to have a motion, Gus, that our position on Articles 1 and 2 will be for dismissal?
I move, you want to, or?
I think you
I
have
move
one
that we,
motion.
I move that we recommend dismissal of Articles 1 and 2 on the special town meeting warrant.
Article 3, which is whether the town will, oh, sorry, yes.
Second.
Jeepers.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. All right, thank you, sorry about that. Article 3 is to see if the town will vote to authorize us to accept a gift of land from the estate of Carol M. Stockman, consisting of an unimproved parcel of land containing approximately 11.8 acres located on the southerly side of Bridge Street and shown on Medfield Assessor's Map 41 as parcel 14.
Again, this was left by deed to the town. The taxes have been or will be paid in full, although the taxes on the property are minimal, so it is a bona fide gift.
And it's a condition in the will or the bequest that it remain forever wild.
It's for conservation purposes.
Yeah.
I move that we recommend approval of Article 3 under the conditions stipulated by the gift.
Second?
All in favor? Yep. Article 3 is see if the town will authorize the Board of Selectmen to lease a portion of town-owned land at the former Medfield State Hospital consisting of the two buildings formerly known as Lee Chapel and the Infirmary, together with the surrounding lands, for a term of up to 99 years. Upon such terms and conditions, the Board of Selectmen determine in the town's interests for the purpose of developing and operating an arts and cultural center, and if deemed necessary or desirable, to authorize the Board of Selectmen to petition the General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to enact special legislation authorizing the town of Medfield to enter into such a lease or do or act anything in relation thereto. Any discussion of this? I know we talked about this the last time. We were in favor of it.
Pete, do you have anything?
I think you said Article 3, but it's Article 4.
Article 4.
Wow, Article 4. I think I read the right text.
Yeah, you did.
You did read the
I'm
right
way
text,
off my
but
game.
Just FYI,
We combined Articles 1 and 2 on that first motion.
when we appeared, Mike and I were at the warrant committee to do a presentation, and there was a certain amount of pushback to some of these articles, including this one, so.
That's fine.
So I can add some color to that as well. I sat down with Joanna Hilbert earlier this week, and she's got the lead with the warrant committee to research this. There's a few points that are important. One, this is authorizing the selectmen to lease it. It is not directing the selectmen to lease it, and the conditions are that we would lease it in the best interest of the town. The issue that Joanna conveyed to me around the warrant committee's concerns are there's a debate, or not even a debate, there's a disagreement among experts on whether the accelerated development of the Arts and Culture Center will contribute to the perceived value of the property to developers, or whether the carving out of the Arts and Culture Center, taking it away from the property available to developers, will cause the developers to see the remainder of the property be less valuable. These are advice coming from people who are experienced real estate developers. The warrant committee was particularly concerned that the selectmen would move ahead with leasing the property before we had a decent readout on that disagreement, whether we would, go in the wrong direction by leasing and committing the property. My conversation with Joanna, and I won't hold her to this because she's still mulling this over and reporting back to the warrant committee, but the discussion we had, at least between us, concluded that once the RFI results are in, from the RFI that's been issued 2 weeks ago, to get feedback from the developers, we would be looking for whatever feedback comes in from that to inform us about whether moving ahead on an accelerated basis with the Arts and Culture Center is a good or a bad idea based on the commercial perspective of developers. And that we'll be getting in. We should be getting the responses in November. We should be processing it by December. So before we would ever actually do anything with this, we would have that information. The other question, and I think as a practical matter, looking at just the Arts and Culture Center, the other open question that the warrant committee is investigating is the infrastructure costs that we know are not fully answered yet, both around infrastructure to be installed on the hospital property itself and infrastructure costs associated with the town's overall infrastructure supporting that property. Gene Minio has an expedited way of providing those services to this site, independent of what happens with the rest of the site, at a reasonable cost. I think it's below $200,000. So it's a chunk of money Probably right now, there's a question of who's on the hook for that. Is it the town or the project? Because we haven't negotiated anything, but the bottom line is, compared to what we were looking at, is the full infrastructure cost for the site. This is, I would say, a manageable issue at the point in time that we decide what to do. From my standpoint, assuming there's no fatal disagreements from the developers that cause us to think we're making a strategic mistake here, I think the moving ahead with the development of the Arts and Culture Center as envisioned at sooner rather than later enhances the town's ability to move ahead with the redevelopment of the state hospital under whatever plans we ultimately settle on, regardless of what happens with the preferred plan and the town's vote on it. So I think it's wise for us to do that, recognizing there's a bit of an unknown there, but the speed and the ability to get something started up there, I think will enhance, just getting the momentum, I think, is gonna help us.
Laurel, just as you grab a microphone, please.
Am I understanding that the RFI results will be coming in after our special?
Correct.
And the promotion of the Arts and Cultural Center isn't an unknown or a new item. Gene and this whole town has been pushing for it for 3 years. So I'm kind of surprised that the warrant committee is now coming up with a question of whether this is a good idea to do it before we have a result in or not.
Well, so the warrant committee has a responsibility for providing the financial analysis and the
understand
financial
that.
wisdom. The total value of the entire state hospital site, McCabe Associates, the advice they gave us to the State Hospital Master Planning Committee was, if you were to accelerate the development of the Arts and Culture Center, that would effectively be an anchor amenity that would make all the rest of the property attractive to developers. There are developers who have talked to people either the development committee, either directly or indirectly, who have said if the town carves out this piece that's at the front end of this overall site, there are developers who say, no, I don't think we would actually use that as a welcome center for our housing development. And presumably, those developers are saying we would see more value in this site if we had access to that chapel and the infirmary for our own plan than otherwise. I think you're absolutely correct. The town's people's sentiment, as expressed through the Master Planning Committee, has been that the town cares about the chapel and the town supports the concept of an arts and culture center. However, the nut that the town has not fully come to grips with is a $25 million or estimated $25 million infrastructure cost just on that site, that it's unlikely developers will be willing to just absorb given the overall cost of developing the site. So we have a careful challenge here of making sure that the townspeople, we know what they want. They don't know necessarily what it costs, and we need to find a path to get to the best place we can.
And I think we also have to be cautious to realize that developers are self-serving entities, and
Right.
their comment about the chapel is a self-serving interest.
Well, and some developers think it would be great to not have to absorb the chapel, so.
Right. And I think that goes, though, Gus, I think to the bigger question, right? I mean, we have the process we're going down is not writing on a clean slate, right? We're not starting from the position of asking developers to come up with their own new process, right? We are at some point, hopefully in the relatively near future, going to present this master plan or an adjustment to this master plan or something to a town meeting to get direction and authority on zoning for Medfield State Hospital. I think to the point about what the people want and whether the people of the town want this, and this is their opportunity to tell us yes or no, right? So if the people of the town want this article will pass at this special town meeting, we'll have this authority. And I think the likely result is that some developers are going to say it's great, some developers will say it's not great. And if the ultimate sentiment of the town is to do the cultural center and something that resembles the master plan and whatever schedule ends up being put out, then we're gonna direct our efforts towards the developers who think it's great and wanna make it a part of it, right? And so, if the RFI response from 100% of the developers is, if there's a cultural center in the Lee Chapel, nobody will buy that thing, that's one thing. I think what the likely answer is gonna be is some of them are gonna say, I want it to be the leasing office for my 900-unit development that I wanna put at the hospital. Some of them are gonna say, I don't want it at all because I'm gonna do something else. And it seems to me, if the ultimate choice of the town is in favor of something that's along the lines of the master plan, then the RFP that we're gonna ultimately issue, if there's ultimately authority to do this, will be directed towards and look for proposals that would be consistent with it. So,
So for those who are worried that we're about to pull the trigger on something that subsequently we find out doesn't make good economic sense, we would not pull that trigger before that RFI information is in, but at the
but
point-
it's not like the RFI is coming back in June, right? We'll have the RFI answers within a month of town meeting. We'll have to do, if this article passes, we'll have to do an RFP for this lease anyway. And so there's gonna be a whole process that would follow. And from my perspective, I'm in favor of this article, but I think it's important one way or the other to get an up or down from the town on this piece of it. Because look, if the town meeting comes back and says, no way, we don't want that there, then we have to adjust more than we thought in the master plan. And if they say, yes, absolutely, we want it, then I think we have guidance that whatever adjustments may come to the master plan out of the RFI process, we should do our darndest to include the cultural center as a part of that adjustment. And what I really wouldn't want to have happen is whatever momentum is being built around this, and there's a lot of work to be done to raise the money to make this happen, to have that momentum stalled while we work through a bunch of other issues, which who knows what we'll work through. And so I think we'll get clear guidance from the town meeting on this, and then we'll also at least be able to keep the ball moving, and then we'll get the RFI responses and evaluate them accordingly. Bill?
So I've spoken about this before. You know where I stand, and I'm in favor of Gene's plan for the use as a cultural center. I see a couple of benefits in terms of it's not going to be used as a cultural center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If the facility's there, an arrangement could be developed, worked with a developer, where the developer could have his sales office, for example, in a portion of the building, or even lease it back from the Cultural Council. What I am concerned about is once, assuming this article passes, we have 4 incentives of 2.5% each on the share ratio that go away once the first piece of property is sold. If they're not in place before the first piece of property is sold, we lose those incentives. Those incentives are not one-time incentives. Those incentives apply to the whole property, regardless of when it is sold. So if you, for example, were to have an incremental development, you were to start your development at the front of the property and save the back of the property for future development, those incentives would apply to that sale of the back of the property whenever it happens, as long as the criteria for those incentives were put in place before the first lease. So when the town meeting approves this, assuming they approve this and everything else, the Board of Selectmen, the warrant committee, whoever is in charge, the new master planning committee, whatever, need to really look at the value of those incentives and to make sure that the lease is not signed before a conscious decision is made to either pursue or not pursue those incentives.
Bill, could you, if you have it on the top of your head, which 4 are you talking about?
All right, so we have expedited permitting, we have sustainability, we have one of them in place. I'm just not sure whether we've cleared it with DCAM, and then they recognize that it's in place. That was the one of the master plan, marketing plan.
Okay, yep.
And then the last one is, that escapes me, I'm sorry.
Master plan.
Yeah.
One of the senators was incorporating the state hospital master plan to the town master
Well,
plan.
but that's sustainability. Actually, what it says is that you embrace the concepts of sustainability as evidenced by the master plan for the hospital that's incorporated in the town-wide master plan.
Okay.
So I sent Jean in her discussions with her, when she was talking about some of these things, I sent her a summary of all of the incentives and which ones are in fact,
So
one time.
So to Bill's point, I think it would I certainly would think we would only want to consciously decide to throw any of those incentives out. So if for whatever reason we made a conscious decision to do it, but otherwise, we would want to make sure that we had those 4 in place before we actually sign the lease on the property, unless, for instance, if the expedited permitting is something that's 5 years down the road. And we've had discussions about 2.5% matches and how actually little in the grand scheme of things they represent. so.
Except, again, I'm not advocating this, but for example, roughly half the property right now is marked for, not conservation land, but at least not for immediate development. What's the value of 25 acres of land in Medfield 25 years from now when all the infrastructure's in place at the hospital in the front? I mean, we're talking megabucks. And 2.5% is a heck of a lot more than it is now when you're talking about, well, a developer's going to have to put in infrastructure, there won't be any net proceeds or whatever.
That's fair.
I mean, we need to take the long view. So I guess my point very simply is, it's more than just whether the developers want the Lee Chapel or don't want the Lee Chapel. We have some other issues in town that we need to resolve. But I am definitely in favor of going forward with the cultural center at the Lee Chapel.
Okay.
I'll point out, we have 2 citizens in town at this meeting that have demonstrated the value that they provide to selectmen trying to figure this stuff out.
So just to follow up a little bit on what Bill was commenting about, I think that we absolutely want to make sure that we're focused on those incentives and try to maximize our return on those incentives. It may be that they're not relevant. It may be that we might structure the deal to basically give the property away, because we're in it for the long term in terms of the tax return on the property. And if anything that we sell it for, we have to share with the state. But we might want to structure the deal so that the sale price is suppressed if we're going to get a greater return on our property taxes down the road, so that we've got multiple interests that we can work with.
All right, do we have a motion for our position on Article 4?
I move that we recommend approval of Article 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, Article 5 and 6 are
Excuse me, one thing on Article 4 you ought to be aware of. When the warrant was put together, we did not have a plan indicating the land the way the article is worded. It says together with surrounding land. We could not define that. Mark has been talking to Gene Minio, and there was some talk about 10 feet from the edge of the building.
Work it out for the motion.
Yeah, so that there will.
Motion's gonna have to be more specific.
And- and-
The survey of the property has been completed, so we should be able to do that. All right, okay. Articles 5 and 6, which is the Senior Housing Residential Development Overlay District. I'm not going to read 5 pages of
Thank
this. Any discussion on this, or? I think we were all in favor of this the last time, so we can have a motion on that.
I move that we the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 5 for the special town meeting.
And 6?
Oh, and 6.
It's just the use
I
table.
recommend that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 6 for the special town meeting and Article 5.
All in favor?
Yep. Aye.
Article 7 is the authorization of the Board of Selectmen to sell or lease the Hinckley property to a private developer for the construction of affordable and/or moderately priced residential housing for seniors.
And I'll recuse myself.
You're recused from this one, Pete, all right?
I recommend that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 7 for the special town meeting.
Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
If you could go back to 6 for a second, I had some concerns at the last meeting that under the Article 6 is to create or add to the table of use regulations. And the way the article is worded, there is nothing in any of the districts relating to whether it's permitted use or by special permit or. So I did ask Mark and Sarah about that, and they said the way it is worded in the zoning bylaw, it references another section of the zoning bylaw that defines what is permitted in those zones. So if someone says, well, how come it doesn't say whether it's special permit or automatic, you have to refer back to the zoning bylaw.
That's 214.7.
That would be the
And I don't
guidance.
remember why the planning board added the use. The use table was not on the original draft, and the planning board added it.
Because everything's summarized, all that we have.
It's gotta be in there.
When we codified, that
Okay.
came along with it.
I see, okay. All right, Article 7, we just did that, right? Article 8, which is to see if the town will vote to propose amendments to the town charter to be submitted to the voters at the next annual town meeting for the election of officers, which would amend Article 3 and amend Article 6 that would remove the town clerk as an elected position and make it a position appointed by the Board of Selectmen at the conclusion of the current town clerk's term.
I move the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 8 at the special town meeting. Second.
All in favor? Article 9 is to see if the town will vote to propose an amendment to the town charter to be submitted to the voters at the next annual town meeting for the election of officers, aka the March election, for their approval pursuant to the Home Rule Procedures Act to amend Article 2 of the town charter so that the open town meeting will be on the first Monday in May instead of the last Monday in April.
I move the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 9 at the special town meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Will that take effect for the spring town meeting?
The annual meeting.
The annual,
No.
so, no?
No?
No, because you're going to put it on the election in March. We'll have already produced all of our information we won't know if it passed at the ballot before we have all of our information produced, with the town warrant, everything.
Is this a ballot question?
Yeah.
It has to go to the election.
Okay, yeah, so it won't take effect, okay.
Yep, it'll be the following year,
Following year.
2020.
Okay.
Another reason we should move our election
Do we
from
need to
March until
specify
June.
it? Do we need to specify when it becomes effective?
Yes.
Put that in
That
the
could be a
motion.
change for next year, but.
And eventually the town moderator needs to be changed as well.
How cold it is in March. Just stand out at these polls.
Well, it's just odd that I mean, I understand why it would in sort of a historical context, you have the election right before the town meeting. But in terms of, you kind of have a turnover in a lot of the elected boards, like a month before town meeting. Even from the moderator's perspective, you're electing the moderator a month before. I mean, obviously, we've had the moderators last a long time, but still, it would be a difficult thing if you only have
Right,
a
if you only had a
moderator
month to
elected in
prepare.
March, then a month to
Yep.
prepare.
Yep.
I think that's something we gotta look at. I think it's a more difficult change to make, Mark, if we were to do that, but I think having the election after town meeting, and that way you'd also, if you did have kind of override votes and everything else coming out of town meeting, you could do it at a regular election instead of having to do, move it around.
Yeah, that gets debated, but most towns, the town meeting and the election are within a week of each other, one way or the other, with the ones first or the others first. That's a philosophical discussion. The other thing, which I've said before, I serve a 3-year term in Medway. I think it's doesn't make sense for the moderator to have to stand for election every year, particularly since he's appointing a warrant committee, long-term duties. It just,
And you wouldn't be able to have an election where the term, you could have the election before, but the term starts after an ATM?
Be a long lag, but, yeah. Something food for thought for the future. So Article 10, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of funding the opening of the center at Medfield on Saturdays through June 30th, 2019, including staffing, operating expenses, programming, meals, utilities, and other associated costs.
Last time I talked to Roberta, the original proposal was around $19,000. She said it was going to be far less than that. Do we have a revised figure from her?
She said she'll get me a revised figure by Friday.
Or Friday?
Well, that's good news.
Well, my concern was that the original grant wasn't written to include operating expenses and utilities, so I was concerned if she was going to run short this year, that it needed to be included in this article and not a reserve fund transfer at the end of the year.
I see, okay.
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 10 at the special town meeting.
Second.
We still have to determine a funding source because free cash will not be certified by the 29th. So you cannot vote the money out of free cash. It disappears July 1st and isn't available for appropriation until the new free cash is certified by the Department of Revenue, which will not be before the 29th.
Can we use the unused tax levy?
Yeah, the assessors have not yet set the tax rate unless they did it tonight. I noticed they were meeting downstairs. But if they have not set the fiscal 19 tax rate, you could vote it to add to this year's tax levy. Otherwise, there are two other possibilities. One is that you could vote it from the fiscal 20 tax levy, I believe. And, or you could, they have some revolving funds or, that it could be voted out of.
So Mike, when we had our last town meeting, because of the mechanics of the balanced budget, the warrant committee's recommended budget and the ultimate override budget, the amount of free cash that we had allocated for all of those budgets, because we had to allocate it for the balanced budget, actually resulted in an over-allocation of free cash to the override budget. Is that money not available? In other words, there's an
That's what I'm
increment of
talking
money.
about,
That's
the
what you're talking
unused
about.
tax levy,
Okay.
That money was voted for a specific purpose.
No, not the general override.
Not the general,
operating
oh,
override.
the
In other
unused
words,
tax.
the amount of free cash
Yes.
that we applied to get to the balanced budget, that we didn't force out of the budgets, was a greater amount out of free cash than we actually needed when the override passed.
Well, you're talking two different terms now. You free cash and unused tax levy. Free cash, you could not appropriate from it at this town meeting because it disappeared July 1st, even though you have available free cash, but there was unused tax levy. We have not reached the maximum amount of
And
levy.
I think you're both saying the same thing. As a result of the over-appropriation of free cash at the 2018 annual town meeting, we have an unusual amount of unused tax levy currently, because
Yes.
we appropriated the free cash at the annual town meeting, assuming that the override would fail.
Yes.
We couldn't unappropriate the free cash, and so
Right.
there's actually a chunk of unused tax levy that isn't really unused tax levy because we're spending it out of free cash, but there's enough
Right.
room there for.
I was hearing that as unused tax levy limit, and it's not. We've actually collected the tax, we just haven't allocated it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Now,
that's, yeah, we are saying.
But the caveat there is it has to be done before the assessors set the fiscal 19 tax rate.
Okay. Well, we can find out if they did it tonight, and if not, maybe they can do it after the special
If
town meeting.
they set the tax rate for the 29th, it would not be available to, you couldn't appropriate from it because the rate would be set, and that includes all your appropriations.
I'll have to sleep on that one, come back and talk. Okay.
Because the rate will be tied to the amount of tax we actually have to collect to pay for the appropriations. Because we paid for a significant chunk of those appropriations with more free cash than necessary, if they set the rate with the, we'll have, we won't, the unused tax levy is taxes aren't collected. And so we have the authorization to tax at that level because of the extra free cash appropriation last spring. We've got that delta. If they've set the tax rate based on that delta, then they can't raise it any further. If they haven't set it, then the $7,000, the $19,000, whatever it is, gets added, and then everybody's taxes go up by half a penny, whatever it would be to fund that amount, or 1 penny.
Right, good explanation.
Okay.
So the full tax hit, of the budget and the override done last year is not gonna be felt in people's tax bills this year because of that free cash appropriation. So, a little good news for everyone watching out there. What you have looking forward to next. Yeah, even better. What you have
They're up
forward to.
8-2?
All right, so do we excellent. Do we have a motion here? Second that emotion, all right, here we go.
Let's see. We are on it, yeah. I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 11 at the
10.
special town meeting. 10? Why did I already mark that down as recommended?
You already voted.
Oh, we did, I'm sorry, Gus.
Yes.
So Article 11, well, I'll just read out what it is.
My motion stands.
Your motion stands. So Article 11 is, ironically, I think may have become the most urgent article on the warrant here, which is to vote to transfer a sum of money from the balance of funds appropriated for the iron manganese removal from the water supply under Article 34 of the 2018 annual town meeting for the purpose of studying and/or implementing the reduction of unaccounted for water in the town's water supply.
I had a note that we still need to know what the amount is, but
That hasn't been determined yet. I talked to Mo, and he met with the consultants today to come up with a recommendation for the Water and Sewer Board. We appropriated $600,000, I believe it was, at the annual for the iron manganese. That was to be spent over a period of years. Their feeling is that since we are so close to the maximum amount of water that the state will allow us to withdraw from the Charles and Neponset basins, and we have a large a reported amount of unaccounted for water, that we need to address the unaccounted for water and reduce that to allow us to free up the water needed for all of the additional development that's been going on the last couple of years. So,
And that's making an assumption we're going to find leaking water and not simply faulty meters.
it's
I
a
think
whole
they think it could be
combination of
both. It could
things.
be leaking mains or faulty meters.
Faulty meters doesn't help us.
Or
We're actually using the water, we're just not recording it. It's only the leaky water that helps us.
yeah, or it could be illegal connections, it could be, there's a whole variety of things it could be, so, yeah.
Okay, I recommend that the Board of I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 11 at the special town meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, did you have a question on that one?
I'm just curious as how do we get to this point without it being addressed?
They have.
I mean,
Without what having been addressed?
I'm just surprised we're at the point where we're at a maximum that we can't account for water. That we can't account for the water at the point that the state would allow, that we wouldn't have found the problem and found a solution.
It's not a, you find the problem and solve it, it's an ongoing problem. You're getting leaks all the time. If you watch the news, Boston's always got a leak, or Chelsea's got a leak. It's the same thing that happens with our supply. You can have a leak. We had a bad leak in Indian Hill last year, or the year before last, that we were losing probably 1.5 million gallons. It can be meters slow down as they age. I think over 2,000 of our meters, or 1,500 of our meters, are over 20 years old. And meters, they recommend changing meters every 10 years. So if a meter slows down, we're not charging for all the water that runs through that meter. That could be a substantial portion of it. It could be a variety of other things. Somebody ties a sprinkler system in before the meter,
But Laurel, I think
and they're
your
not
question
charged
is,
for it.
how is it the town got so close to the maximum limit without seeing us about to hit the wall until now? And I think the driver is especially the water projections for the redevelopment of the state hospital site suddenly has added a significant chunk of water. I think it's a fair question. We probably should have been able to extrapolate and said, hey, we're gonna have a problem in 2022. But when you introduce the state hospital project in its full glory and the water requirements for that hospital project, all of a sudden you're putting a very large chunk of water demand into the total. So I think your question's valid, but it's not quite like we didn't see it coming at all. It's that suddenly we're trying to figure out how to fit in this suddenly.
I mean, I will disagree with that to a certain extent. I mean, I will say to you, I mean, I learned about this the first time earlier this year, and I was really surprised by it. And in fact, you know, we had come close to this number in between 2013 and 2015 is actually when we got the closest to the limit. And so I don't know the answer to the history of it. I think, you know, we have an investigative reporter here. He can figure it out if he wants to figure it out. I think the reality is, it is something we have to figure out now that it's come, you know, to our attention. We have to deal with it. And so, you know, whatever the history of it is, I'm grateful that the Water and Sewer Board and the DPW and Mo are moving to deal with this now. And I think, you know, this wasn't the reason why we ended up having a special town meeting, but I think that the timing of it has worked out well, because it's logical to me that instead of spending $600,000 to enhance our capacity by taking the iron and manganese out of one well, to figure out this problem first with our existing infrastructure at a much lower cost. It's gonna be a lot less than $600,000.
Yes, yeah.
I think we're between 10 and, there's two different options, and I think one is 25,000 and one is 200,000, depending on what you do. Some, Bobby's nodding his head, so maybe I'm close to correct.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there, so, but the Water and Sewer Board and Mo have to sort out exactly what they wanna do with it.
Part of the unfairness of this is we have tried to do everything right to protect our water supply. We put far more water back into the basins than we take out. The communities that build and do nothing to protect their water supply, the state says you get more water. So it is the ultimate, in my mind, is one of the ultimate unfairnesses, that if you try to do the right thing, the state punishes you. If you go merrily along and do whatever you damn well please, then they reward you.
So
And just look at some of the communities around here and see the building that's gone on without any thought of how to generate the water for it. And
So there are actually two issues. One is bumping up against the state limits that they'll allow us to take out of the ground, and the second is the amount of unaccounted water. And what I've learned very recently is that we're at around 25%, and we should be around 10 or 15%. So that's another thing that we need to solve.
And I think, Mike, you had said at times in the more distant past, we were at an even higher number of unaccounted water, and it's come down.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, we were around 90 gallons. I think we're very close. They want you to be 65, the state. Charles River Water Association wants you to be 50 gallons. So we'd be way over, if Charles River Watershed gets its way, we'd be way over our allotted supply. And we'd have to shut down sprinkler systems or make drastic, water restriction, outdoor watering restrictions. So.
Mr. Sorrell.
I just wanted to let you know that outside counsel is here, has been here for some time for the executive session, so.
Okay. Well, we'll move through the other items on our agenda. I think we said it would be at the end of the meeting, so we do have to get to the end of the meeting. So we'll go quickly. The next one is potential guidance to Parks and Recreation and Council on Aging. Nothing to discuss. I just put together a draft for both of your considerations of potential guidance to the Council on Aging and the Parks and Recreation Commission. This is the first year we'll be operating under the new bylaw that we passed, which directs the Permanent Planning and Building Committee to make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen about building projects. I don't know whether Parks and Recreation or Council on Aging intends to bring any articles forward for the annual town meeting this year. I originally put this together back in the spring and then kind of lost the track on it, so I'm gonna hand you that. And to that, we can discuss that further. So, Gus, I think you had, I think our
Minutes,
well, do you want to do some zip through our town goals and the
Yeah,
other things?
so-
You have our finalized version of the Board of Selectmen and the town goals here.
So
I don't
what
think there's anything to discuss.
What I sent out to you, there were, if you may recall, there were 3 administrative changes we made the last time we went through the town goals. One was I'd had a note on the first page, and we moved 2 of the specific goals on the last page over to the action item list. So this is gonna be a living document anyway, but as of our discussions to date, this should be the final current document expressing town goals. So if you have any further
So we'll review this
issues, you
and
can
we'll
review it and
put
bring them
this on
up.
our,
I think we're good to go on that one.
put this on our agenda to vote on next time.
Right. This
All right.
is, the other thing that I sent out was the action item list, which, now this is still a draft. This was the one that we looked at. Everything that's on the action item list that's proposed means that I've carried it over from the list that Christine provided or the list that we kind of added when we reviewed the town goals. Because it's proposed, that means we haven't actually discussed it. And what we talked about is the way we would do this, given how long the list is if we have a meeting where we have some spare time, we'd start working away on the list.
Okay. And so Christine and Evelyn can make sure get both of these
Both of
posted.
those on the next agenda.
And posted to the website as well.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, minutes. I'm skipping the town administrator update for now.
I just wanted to pass those out. Everyone thinks that Massachusetts is wonderful financial shape. That's Truth in Accounting based on fiscal 17 audit reports of the 50 states. Massachusetts ranked 46th in its soundness financial condition, and we got a grade of F.
All right, congratulations to us, all right.
And that was with Medfield holding the average up there.
And so that $1 billion that the surplus the state has is gone
Okay.
before they even spend it.
All right, I had great plans for it, but oh well. All right, acceptance and/or corrections of meeting minutes. Gus, do you have any?
So, the April 12th meeting minutes, I didn't have any comments.
Pete, any comments on that one?
If I had any, I sent them along to Evelyn. I don't remember at this
I
point.
think those
And if
were
I had
well
changes, I
corrected.
would have sent them to you guys too.
Yeah. All right, so do we have a motion to approve
Yeah,
the April 12th?
I move that we approve the April 12th meeting minutes.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, April 24th?
April 24th, you want to go first, Pete?
April 24th?
I don't have any changes that I can remember.
Yeah, I said that the minutes were okay. There were a few minor typos. You spelled Mike's name wrong, last name wrong once. You left out the first C. And there was like 2 or 3 other places that kind of typos, so I don't, except for that possible one.
I can live with it.
Okay, I
I'll just
move.
blame
that-
this Marucci character for whatever happened.
The Marucci, son, too.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, at least it's not scaring me. Okay. I move that we approve the April 24th Board of Selectmen meeting minutes.
All in favor? Yep. August 14th?
August 14th, I had that the update that Christine made was fine.
Okay.
Second.
I move that we approve the August 14th Board of Selectmen meeting minutes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, September 18th?
September 18th, I forwarded a corrected version annotated with marked changes to the September 18th minutes. The changes were either editorial or clarifying things. I did add, under the traffic enforcement discussion, I added a fair amount pointing out the discussion we'd had about the curve at the fork on North Street and Harding Street. And I just wanted that in the record. That's something that we should get fixed. I think it is a safety hazard, so. I
And
just
by the way,
wanted to-
since you mentioned that, Gus, I'm so fixated on that every time I'm driving down that end. I see that exact thing.
People are gradually getting used to just ignoring that stripe and going across it, but I've been tempted to get a can of black paint and just go out somewhere. If I
was
wasn't
fascinated.
a selectman, I would do that. but-
Well, I was fascinated by your comments about that, Gus, because I had noticed that I had almost missed I
Yeah.
had turned late a couple times there.
I didn't believe it until
Get
both
around
my
the-
wife and
the
my neighbor
lines.
hit me with the same thing and explained why it was a safety. And it's like,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, you're absolutely
That
right.
that was the major one, and then I had, the rest of it was all typos. The only thing I clarified on the request for the lights, the reserve request when we put Chief Wilhelmy off, is I just added a statement that said, I had requested that they do their best to absorb as much of that cost they can, just because it wasn't in there, but those are the changes.
We have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
I move that we approve the September 18th meeting minutes as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Mike, this is your one piece of good news for the town administrator report? Nothing else?
Yes, that's it.
All right, any selectmen reports? Pete?
I went to a legislative breakfast that was put on by the MMA. And it was out in Framingham, so that there were mainly Metro West legislators, ones that I wasn't used to seeing. David Linsky and some senators, well, there were maybe 3 senators, 6 state reps. There was a good turnout.
They have a plan for the Ashland Public Safety Building?
Yeah, there wasn't a comment about that, and I did see the town administrator from Weston and told him to give Jerry McCarty back to us, and he hadn't really met him. He was surprised. He's apparently only been on the job a couple of weeks or something. But Needham Selectman Dan Matthews asked those in attendance to give us more money from the state, and I seconded that, and I gave him my suggestion to have, since the auto excise tax goes to the towns, if they would tax the vehicles at their fair market value instead of the steep depreciation, we'd probably double or triple our take on that. The problem is that the legislature won't increase taxes. There's a revenue problem in the state. They need more revenue, and they're unwilling to tax people. As they said to my suggestion, oh, that'll be popular. And of course, it's not popular. Nobody wants to pay taxes, but there's a disconnect because everybody wants the services.
They're very willing to spend money, but they're not willing to raise it.
No, they aren't.
It's
That's the
the federalese disease has spread to the state level, and that's why we get an F on that. One of the reasons.
On that point, do you plan to go to that selectmen's meeting on Saturday
On the
morning?
20th, I'm going.
You're going,
At
eh?
Denver, at Devon's.
Devon's,
Yeah,
yeah. I
I'm
haven't
going.
signed up for it, but I've been trying to figure out my schedule. I probably will try to do that, if you want to ride together. If I do, I'll call you. We can ride
Alright.
together. Otherwise, you're on your own.
Anything else, Pete?
No, that's,
All right, Gus?
I had I think in the last meeting, I neglected to comment about the development committee meeting that I'd been to before that one that got the RFI out. But if you didn't know, the RFI has gone out. Sarah is following up. I've gotten a little bit of indication that some developers don't seem to have received it for some reason, so we're working on that. And I think Todd in particular has been in touch with some of the developers he knows to encourage them to respond. So we're hoping that we'll get some reasonable response. This afternoon, Mike and the other members of the OPEB Trust Fund Committee met, then we only meet like maybe twice a year unless there's some reason, but we thought that we ought to take a look at the end of fiscal year performance of the trust fund. So what I've given you here is simply 2 slides. The first one is a copy of the slide you saw from us last December, which is the OPEB liability status as of 2017. So we haven't gotten an updated actuary report to get new numbers. That's just there for your reference. But the OPEB trust fund status as of the end of June 30th, 2018, sat at $2.889 million. We've been putting $400,000 in a year, although our plan for this upcoming fiscal year is to bump that up to $425,000. The good news is that in the first, so we've had the money in with PRIT for 2 full years as of June 30th. In the first year, we made a 12.77% return, which worked out to be $253,000. In this second year, we got a 9.53% return, which happened to be $251,000. So far, 2 years running, we've been able to generate about $250,000. And then, because we had the information on that bottom line, the fund balance as of August 31st was $3.34 million. So PRIT has been a good decision for us to put our OPEB trust fund money in. We're getting a good return, and we're waiting for the other shoe to drop in the market for things. I think actually September it was up even more, and then October it was down probably about to that same level. So,
You know, seeing those rates of return, it reminds me of the things like the school building assistance money, when they paid it to us all at once, we had to put it into very low rate of returns,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and so that we basically got like 1 or 2%.
well, right now, we like PRIT a
Returns.
lot. We're doing okay.
Well, is that it?
That's it.
All right, I'm looking at Leslie over there. I'm going to pass my selectmen report. Unless there's anything further, I will declare that we need to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing pending litigation regarding LCB, both the DEP and Landhort cases, and holding the meeting in open session will be detrimental to the town's litigating position.
I move that the Medfield Board of Selectmen go into executive session for the following purpose: to discuss strategy with respect to litigation. As an open meeting has been declared to have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares.
Do you have a second?
Second?
Wait a minute, and not to resume an open session.
And not to, I always forget that, not to resume at the conclusion in open session. Selectman Peterson.
Yes.
Chairman Marcucci.
Aye.
Selectman Murphy, aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good weekend, Peg.